This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Mark, welcome.
Welcome to BRD. We've got a recurrent guest, Lust for Life, Jimmy, a.k.a. Jimmy Neutron, along with GPS. And, there's a lot going on in the world, but one of the things that we haven't covered, and it kind of hits a lot of different topics all in one story, is the tennis player who was just deported from Australia and did not get to play in the Australian Open. And that's why we invited Lust on, because, man, he's in the weeds on this almost as much as the St. Louis Rams story.
It's true. I'm in the weeds of basically every story of sports law, so I'll take it, Mark. The tennis player in question, Novak Djokovic, he's the world number one tennis player currently, but not only that, you can make an argument that he's the greatest tennis player of all time. People talk about Super Bowls, World Series championships. In tennis, it's the Grand Slam title. He's tied for the most all time with Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal. This guy is tennis royalty who's at the heart of this.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, he's the defending champion of the tournament in question. Is that correct?
Defending champion, but 9-time winner of the Australian Open. He's won it more times in the history of the sport. So he's kind of like tennis royalty, but particularly in Australia, the guy wins it every single time. And he's Serbian. I think that's important. He's not Australian. So maybe they're not taking so kindly to a Serbian winning their title. But yeah, he's not from the country.
And so as I remember, what happened is he was held when he entered the country. Then turned out that supposedly there was a question that he didn't answer truthfully, or whether it was inadvertent or truthful, ended up being deported, went back to Serbia, where, by the way, he is a hero's welcome. And most people took the position there, at least, that this was kind of an anti-Serbian move by Australia. I think that's fair. And then there's been some developments, if you want to get into it, Jimmy.
Yeah. I love when you call me Jimmy. I think it's kind of, the long and short, he gets to the country. He's the world number one tennis player. In Australia, they're very serious on border control. And he had what was a legitimate medical exemption to not get the vaccine. People make the joke online. His name is Novak Djokovic. People say Novak's Djokovic. There's a word play in there.
That's a pretty good dad joke.
Yeah.
It's a dad joke.
I am a dad, so I can make these jokes.
Okay.
He claimed he had an exemption for the past. The problem is he had some inaccuracies on his form, in particular the one that people focused on and the Australian government focused on. It said that he had not traveled in the last 14 days prior to entering the country, which, if you looked at his social media, turned out not to be true. And Novak, while he was still in Australia, said, "Well, human error. I checked the wrong box. Not a big deal." And Mark, they held him really in detention while the court was figuring this issue out. What we call what is now in hindsight being called a roach and maggot infested hotel. And the guy wasn't allowed that term is being used not by the Australian authorities. No, it's being used by Novak's camp. So
yes,
you hit it, Mark. The guy is deported from the country, but what he is now saying, that the newest development, that he's threatening, and I believe the New York Post had this story, but threatening a $4.4 million lawsuit against the government of Australia for their treatment and kicking him out, number one. And number two, because they prevented him from playing in the Australian Open, which, as we mentioned, right, guys won it 9 times. He was the favorite.
So what's the prize money if he had won?
$2.75 million. So the rest of the 4.4 is humiliation, all this stuff. But 2.75 is the tournament.
So he's suing based on
basically.
He's suing based on the presumption that he wins. How exactly do you justify that in court? I guess you can look at historical, but if I'm on the other side of that, I can point to every athlete's decline as they age. So.
Yeah, number one, right, if I'm playing devil's advocate, which I agree with you, I think it's completely speculative. But if there's someone going to be arguing that it's not speculative, it's the guy that's won it the most times in history. And if you look at the Vegas sportsbook, he was the favorite to win it this year. But injuries, upsets, right? You could have anything that happens. Maybe someone that doesn't have the vaccination gets COVID in the middle of the tournament, has to drop out. So there's a lot of factors that you can't really plan out. So that's why, right, if Mark and I are on the case, we're saying these damages are purely speculative. Maybe you have the best argument to make it of any player in the world.
If we're defending, if we're representing, we're going to be arguing, look, this is no different than future earnings. And you've got some expert who comes in and says, look, based on his winning 9 times, I can make a cogent argument that this is something he shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Right, but there's a degree of any future earnings are always going to be speculative in some sense, right? You could get hit by a bus tomorrow and all of a sudden you're not making that money. But hey, this guy has the best argument of anyone possible, so he's entitled to something. Maybe not 2.75, but we can find a number in there that certainly adds up. But yeah, I mean, Mark, we were talking about it, and I'm explaining this lawsuit isn't just really towards Australia looking back; it's looking forward because there's France, which has the French Open. It's going to be held in the spring. The French Sports Ministry had this interesting statement recently, and they said, we have a new vaccine. There will be no exemptions provided to anyone. So Novak Djokovic, who is, part of this anti-vax, belief, French Open's another major tournament. So you're having this battle now, and the U.S. Open's held in New York. Wimbledon's held in the U.K. So
very interesting what would happen with the U.S. Open, given some of the kind of back and forth. Yesterday, I'm in New York right now. A Supreme Court judge, which is the trial level judge, ruled that the one of the mandates is not valid, and took the position that the order, the emergency order, you can't have a perpetual emergency. I wonder where I've heard that before. Therefore, the person who issued the order was not cloaked with the authority to issue it, and invalidated it. And started with kind of a preface that nobody is going to say that this was not well-intentioned. But, however, there isn't a legal or constitutional basis to do it.
Yeah, I think, that's really where this lies. If you and I were representing Novak, what we would say is, listen, maybe even the threat of a lawsuit's going to calm these French Open people down, the U.S. Open people down. But if you just let the French Open and the U.S. Open, and all of a sudden, you're not playing, you're not able to earn a living. So maybe this is a preemptive move, but I certainly think it's worth paying attention to it. So it's a political story, kind of, because the French prime minister's in there. Right. And it's going to start touching all the other countries. France, I wouldn't be surprised if Biden got into a fight with Novak, because Novak got into a fight with the Australian prime minister about 2 weeks ago. So you certainly can't rule that out.
What do you think, Gary? Where do you fall on this?
I would say it seems like more of a distraction to the tennis world than anything. This story stretched on for days and days with just, new developments every single day. And then eventually it just went up in smoke, and Australia kicked him out. Now, you mentioned Wimbledon. He's not going to have any problems there because Boris Johnson keeps getting caught in his backyard. So he abandoned all, mandates of any kind. So I guess the very tired young father in me is hopeful that the rest of the world will have to follow suit with the UK, and it's going to take some time. I think that if it does happen, the US will be last, because I think there's just so much entrenchment in our country that it's going to be very hard for Joe Biden to step back and say I was wrong. So I don't know. I think, but I do think it's going to be interesting, especially because, as you guys mentioned, the US Open is in New York, which is one of the more restrictive states. So I don't know if he's going to be able to play in that one.
So I wonder, where would Novak, if he's, as far as I can tell, he has not filed suit yet, where would he file suit? I mean, is he going to file suit in Australia, which wouldn't let him in? And then how does he get in to prosecute his suit? And is he going to go to the international court? I don't think they've got jurisdiction necessarily. So it's an interesting, it's one thing to say I'm going to file. It's another thing to get past the motion to dismiss stage. And then where's your end for this? And how are you going to proceed? I'd be interested in seeing what their theory is for where they can file. I suppose they could file it in Serbia, but I'm not familiar with the Serbian constitution and what kind of immunities there are for sovereigns, right?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part. Like, and I think it certainly requires a deep dive into the particular countries. But from Serbia's perspective, I think that's probably, assuming he can get into court there, his best shot, right? His home form. If you try this suit in Australia, right? Like, I don't know, you certainly don't have home court advantage, no pun intended. Australia's going to throw this thing out in a second. So your best bet's in Serbia, but that's as his residence. I know in New York you can base suit based off, or in the United States where the party resides. That's usually one form of jurisdiction. But I don't know if Serbian law is going to apply here. I mean, Mark, you and I can probably agree. If he files suit in Australia saying that the Australian government treated him poorly, I don't know how favorably that's going to be looked at.
I think that there's a lot of hurdles you'd have to get over, or a lot of nets you're going to have to leap in order to get that legal volley to actually fall. But we'll wait and see and see how it plays out. Gary, I want to thank Dan. He did this at the last minute for us because I was kind of intrigued by the legal issues here.
Absolutely. I want to thank him as well. And Dan, why don't you tell our audience what your Twitter handle is? That's where I get most of my sports law news, and it's an excellent read.
It's Sports Law Lust, all one word. My name is not Jimmy, as I have to clarify on this podcast. My name is Sports Law Lust. Let's pretend I don't have a first name. It's just Sports Law Lust. That's where to find me on Twitter and Instagram.
Well, that's a phenomenal follow. I encourage anyone who likes these episodes to follow you there, because you cover a lot more than we have time for on these short hits on Beyond. So thank you for joining us, and everyone go check him out on Twitter.
Thanks, you guys. Good to see you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Stay tuned for more bonus episodes coming soon.